Okay guys, this is Eric Nelson with Nelson Gunsmithing. I'm doing another video for you today. Okay guys, this is Eric Nelson with Nelson Gunsmithing, doing another video for you today. This one I'm going to do a teardown, cleaning, lubrication, and reassembly of a Ruger Vaquero. This is the 357 model. And as always, we start by confirming that we are clear. For the Vaqueros, you open up your loading gate, rotate through your cylinders. Just to be safe, we're going to pull out the cylinder pin, set that aside, and roll out our cylinder. There we go, a little stuck. Needs new grip panels, which is why I'm cleaning this today anyway. So it's been shot a little bit. This is a good one to do a little work on. So there is one tool that is absolutely indispensable before you get started, and that is this little guy. This is a gate detent takedown tool. I'll show you how it works here in a minute. You can get this from Brownells. It's a very simple tool. You can even make this yourself if you're pretty handy in a shop. But trying to take down and reassemble a Vaquero without this is just a nightmare. It's a $15, $20 tool, worth every penny if you're ever going to do this more than once. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take out the mainspring. The way we do it by cocking the hammer, insert a pin, very gently take the tension off the hammer. There you go, that's all there is. And a little, oops. Needle nose pliers. Lift off your trigger return spring legs. There you go. Sometimes these will pop out, sometimes they won't. It's okay to leave it where it is for now. Next thing we're going to do start loosening up these screws. And you can go from back to front or front to back. The most important thing is that you remember that you've got basically 4 unique screws here, and I'll show them all to you here in a second so you can see what I'm talking about. As always, for people who want to know, I'm using my Wheeler gunsmithing kit. These are hollow ground screws. Actually, I'll show you real quick why they're so important. See how it stays on there? You're only going to get that with a hollow ground tip where the sides are parallel. A chisel tip, classic screwdriver chisel tip here, you can see how that's a straight angle. Or not a straight angle. You can see how that's a chisel, right? It's an angle. The hollow ground will support those bits. It's very important to use hollow ground screw bits to keep you from damaging your gun. I see a lot of these that somebody very obviously took apart using the wrong bits. So you have, as I said, you have 4 unique screws. Front screw, we're going to take, I'm just going to set it aside here, but it's important to remember the order, all right? And we'll show you a trick here in a minute for remembering these. I think the nomenclature for those is the B screw. Front screws are A, then it's B, and then the rear ones are C. And again, you can get all these off Brownells. And if you need these parts numbers, I have them handy. These hollow tips, you want these chisel tips. Good Lord. With the hollow ground bits, you should feel a little bit of resistance as it goes into the slot. Not a whole lot, but just enough that you feel it really kind of sinking home. If you're having to push it, if you're having to force it, if you're ever forcing anything with a gun, you're doing something wrong. But look how nicely that fits there. if I can get that in focus. You see? That keeps them from getting knurled up. Or chewed up. Now, one thing I want you to do here, you got this front one off. I want you to put your thumb through your trigger guard. Hold your frame in your left hand. Well, you get off these last couple screws. Because the interior is under tension. And this helps keep things from flying apart. That right there is why I had my hand over that plunger element. That will go flying if you're not careful. I'm going to take that out and set that aside. So we now have this broken down. Whoops. Oh, come on, you. Boy, I hate those modern safety plungers. There we go. And then to take out your trigger return spring, this pin right here pushes out. It should be under very little tension. Very easy to lose though. One of the reasons I recommend taking that out right away. There we go, and that's the trigger return spring. This little guy right here. Now we have our stripped frame. This dowel, do not take that out. There's no reason to. There's no reason to take out these hooks here. They're pressed into place. Leave the rest of it alone. But that's finished. I'm going to set that aside here. Now we have our upper. It's the other reason you take this thing apart very carefully. This is the plunger for your pawl. That's your plunger spring. I have to poke the pawl out here in a second. So the paw's still in there, so I got to be careful with this thing. Now then, this is where the tool comes in very handy. All right, we're going to back our screw out. You're going to push this about as far back as it'll go. See if I can get you guys to see what I'm doing in here. And you want to start turning that screw very gently. Now you want to check to make sure you're not hitting the frame. It requires very little pressure. Yep, that one's dinging the frame. So I'm going to go work on this real quick. This is the first time. This is a new one. I broke my old one. That's how much I use it. So I'll be right back. I'm going to go fix this. Okay, we're back. So all I did is I ran over to my vise real quick. I clamped it up. You can see how it's shiny there. I used my file and cut it down. Not very much, 1/2 millimeter. And then I ran over with that screw and I tapered it on my little bench grinder. The reason you want to be careful is because if it's bumping the side of the frame here, I can see it doing it, you're going to get a little ding right there on the steel. And you do that enough, it's going to start to get pissed off. It's cosmetic, but it's a professional thing. I don't like doing damage to people's guns. So we push this all the way back, and it really just does take finger pressure. If you're having to use more than this, there's something going on. And the way we check is I keep my index finger on this pin here as it goes as I go, and when I feel the pin, this pin here, so the pin was sitting a little proud, and what I do is I just leave my finger on it while I'm tightening, and then when it goes, it goes. You saw that only took maybe 1 or 2 full rotations of this little pin. If you go too far with this, you will ruin your gate detent spring. Ask me how I know. Okay, so you see here how that gate detent spring holds that pivot pin in place? So one more time here. Again, it takes very little effort to do this. 1 screw turn and 2 screw turns. There we go. That is your trigger pivot pin. Yeah, there you go. I'm going to set that one here. At this point, the rest of it just kind of pops out. This is your gate detent spring. All right, this actually serves several functions, but the main role it serves is to hold your gate detent, or to hold your gate in place. The other one it works with too is your bolt catch. This guy here. Bolt catch is what helps guarantee cylinder alignment. This is what gives you your timing. Now, if your gate detent spring is floppy or if it's out of spec, this won't lift adequately and your gate will flop open. In either case, if you see, if you're looking at your gate and it's sitting a little open, you can see it there. If your gate is sitting just a little open, or if it flops a little, it's time to replace your gate detent spring. All right, that pin, no tension there, that just pushes, sorry, that pin right there, that's your hammer pin, that just pushes right out. Parts out of the way here. Trigger and transfer bar. There's your hammer. And this is your hand or your paw. Both, there are two nomenclatures for it, both are correct. This is what makes your cylinder rotate. Because it sits back here and it pushes it up as you pull the trigger. Your ejector rod housing is really straightforward. You don't have to take this off for normal servicing. I often do when I'm cleaning these because I find a lot of rust and gunk. It's the wrong size one for that. I found a lot of rust and gunk hidden under them. They do come loose with alarming frequency, mostly because of the holsters that people tend to use for these guns. There we go. Yeah, see how much better that fits? Yeah, and that's under tension. It just slides out. See, even then, I've already cleaned this, and there's still a little layer of shmoo under there. Now, the last thing we're going to do, this is your base latch retaining pin. Okay, I think that's the technical term for it. This is what holds the pin for your cylinder in place. Where the heck I just put that? Here it is. All right. Now, we're going to replace that today because I have an extra power spring, and I strongly recommend replacing these very frequently. The ones from the factory are very anemic. Now, there's a bunch of ways to do it. The one that I found that I like best is to use my good Knipex pliers here. You guys can see what I'm doing. So I'm holding that with my good smooth face Knipex pliers. They're non-marring. And really anything would work. You know, you can use rubber pliers, that kind of thing. Just something that's soft and non-marring. You don't need to over clamp it. It's not under a lot of tension. There we go. Okay. You always remember the long arm goes to the right. Which I always forget. You'll watch me forget again here in a minute, I'm sure. Okay. And that is the factory pin. Now we're going to go ahead and just throw this out because I have a new one for it. This is a Wolf Precision pin. It's much stronger. Which means it's less likely to wear out, and I'm less likely to have my cylinder pin start walking forward, which is a big problem, believe me. This is something we run into a lot at the cowboy shooting events we do. These pins have fatigued and people's cylinder pins are walking out. And on the Vaqueros, that's a real problem because this is part of what works with your safety system. Alrighty. So, I mean, I cleaned this very recently, so it doesn't really need to get in there. A few problem spots you're going to want to observe. Your firing pin is captured. Do not remove that. There's a way to remove it. You tap out a near invisible pin right here, but you should not ever need to do that as part of your regular cleaning and maintenance. Modern Vaqueros, this is your cylinder stop. Do not ever remove that. There's no reason to. I mean, you can. Some people think that they're an unnecessary safety mechanism to keep the cylinder from overspinning. I personally am not sure I agree with the rationale behind it, but I'm never going to advise you to take out a safety mechanism on your gun. So, there it is. So to do reassembly, we just work backwards. Let's make sure that our ejector rod's looking good. A little shmoo on that still. Now, for modern guns, I like to use Slip 2K almost exclusively, but for these cowboy guns, grease really seems to be where it's at. And we've had a lot of really favorable responses from people who have used our cleaning method, and we've used grease on their guns. So this is what we're going to start with. For the non-critical parts, a little jig. And I'm just going to make a little pile of grease right there. Way I'm not going back and forth into my container every 5 seconds. So I'm just going to run a little layer of jig right here on the back of the housing. And this just helps seal out contaminants. And stainless can rust. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It just rusts much more slowly. And we want a little blue Loctite. On this screw. There we go. And I recommend doing that basically anytime you take it off, just because that is a part that gets lost with alarming frequency. So we have our ejector rod housing here. Ejector rod. Small end goes onto the rod. Okay, there we go. And you should be able to get it to reciprocate a little bit there. You're feeling for kinks or jams or burrs. Then we just take it over to the frame. Oops, sorry, I bumped my camera there. There we go, and that's very minimal amount of torque on that. It really doesn't take much because that's not a major part. I mean, you can get by without one. I've seen people do it. It's not fun. It makes ejecting the round suck, but what are you going to do? So this is the part that kind of stymies a lot of people here. It's how to reassemble your action. Now this one's already been pretty well polished and played with. I worked on this a little bit. I've done some of our special modifications to it. The secret sauce, if you will. So this is what hangs a lot of people up, is actually getting the action put back in. And once you do it a few times, it becomes pretty easy. So we're going to take our gun. We know how the hammer should be oriented to it. The pawl is inserted into that hole here opposite the plunger. Okay, so here's our alignment. You can see that the hooks on the pawl need to face the same way as the hammer. We're just setting that there for a second. This one took me forever to figure out how to do right. Okay, we have our trigger. And we're going to hang the transfer bar from this guy. Because you can see it can only go in on that side nearest me. And you just give it a little wiggle and a jiggle, and it drops in. And it really does. If you can't get it to go, you just kind of love it back and forth, and they'll eventually fall into place. The biggest thing is to make sure of is that your plunger on your hammer is behind the trigger. Very important for the proper function of this firearm. There you go. There you see. And we just make sure, we glance down, you make sure your hammer pivot pin is in line where it should be. And that's the one I always start with when I'm reassembling. Now, here's the trick. This pin can go in both directions. The proper way to insert it then is with the notch on the same side as your gate detent. The reason I say proper is because if you do it one way every time, all the time, you'll never get it wrong. But if you do it backwards, you will break it. The reason this is important is that this long pin is what retains that cross pin there, which is why it's very important that your notch be on the same side. So I always put it on the same side as that gate detent. Put our gate in next. The gate goes in very simply right there. This part is tricky, and this is what gets a lot of people. So we have our base latch. We have our cylinder bolt stop. Okay, and that goes right here. What we're going to do is we're going to line up these two parts at the same time because it makes it a lot easier to put them in. Keep your cylinder, keep your cylinder gate in place with your thumb. What you're going to do is, again, this is kind of a wiggle and a jiggle thing. You want to get that bolt latch just behind the trigger and it all drops in. What gets a lot of people is right there. See, if you do this incorrectly, you may end up with your gate detent spring sitting over your gate, or it may be locked way behind it. You want to make sure it's sitting directly on top of that little notch there. If it's coming through well enough or not. It has to be sitting just like that. Okay? And the way you can tell is you move your gate a little bit. Alright? So keeping that all in place. Now sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you can get away with doing this by hand. Oh, but this one's not going to let me. That's a good stiff spring. It's brand new. So we take our tool, just a couple turns, and then what we do is we feed in our pin, and again, that gate detent spring is what retains that pin. Little wiggle and a jiggle. Maybe we take our pin here. There we go. That's a little gunsmith trick. If you've got a lot of parts lined up, you can kind of reach in, kind of twist and jiggle, and there it goes. You see how it's dropped in? And again, we will make sure that pivot pin, okay, this is your trigger pivot pin. We want to make sure, this guy right here, we want to make sure that the detent is on the same side as your gate. That little lock there, because that's what your gate detent spring is what holds that in place. And there we go. It's just that easy. Now this gun isn't likely to fall apart on us, so let's go ahead and just finish reassembling it now. Now we go back to our screws. Now this is what is very important to kind of keep your screws in order, alright? I'm going to show you why. You've got this front one, that's the shortest one, and it's got kind of a pan head. That's for the front. The two in the back are identical. And those are the two that go right here. This one, this is what retains that pivot pin. So that one can only go on the same side as your gate, right? That's why we were so careful about that before. Let's see if I can. So the pawl plunger is greased in there. It doesn't want to come out. I think you can kind of see it. There we go. That's your pawl plunger. Don't lose that. I put mine in there with a lot of grease because I don't like those falling out. That is what makes your pawl work. See how the pawl is not coming out of the frame there? Without the plunger in place, it's just going to jam. So if you're having issues, getting your cylinder to rotate, odds are good it's your pawl. Okay? And odds are good it's the pawl plunger spring. I see these put in backwards a lot. So now we've got our action components put in. We have the pivot spring reinstalled. What we're going to do is we're going to reassemble the upper, or the receiver element to the grip. Now there's two very important parts here to be aware of. The first, this plunger here is what lifts your bolt catch. It's very important. The second one is your pawl spring, which goes in that topmost hole, the smallest one, with the plunger ahead of it. Now you can't see the plunger, and I couldn't get it out because it's in there with some grease right now. But there's a plunger, and then you put your spring in behind the plunger. All right. Now when you do your reassembly, it's very important you keep an eye on both springs at once, because we want to make sure that the plunger rides right here on the back of the bolt. But we also want to make sure we don't crimp that spring by going too fast. So you got to kind of watch them both go at the same time. That just takes a little bit of practice, and it goes together real easily. I just hook my thumb in there for a little support. A little trick to make that easier for you. All right, and I'm just going to put in the front screw for now, because all I want to do is just hold this thing together for a second. Okay, now we're not done yet, but what we can do is we can look at our gate detent, make sure it opens and closes freely, and you want to make sure that it's dropping your bolt catch out of the way. That's your functions check there. All right, if your bolt does not drop out of the way, then your gate detent spring is probably bad. Alrighty. Now then again, our pivot pin, we always put in with the notch on the right side, same side as the loading gate, but we always check too, because it takes just a second to check, and once in a while you do get it backwards, but you can see the notch there, right? So, notch is on the right side, long pin goes in on the right side. And again, I'm not tightening this up quite yet. I just want to get it in there so I know where all my pins are. There you go. And then as your little check, you push that pin. It may have a little slop to it, but it should not come out. You've got that medium-sized pin. That goes in on the other side. While I'm doing this, I'll give a quick shout out to Idaho Gun and Outdoors. This is where I bought this gun. It's a Ruger Vaquero 357 Magnum. This is a newer model. It's a nice gun. There we go. A little tighter than it needed to be there. In fact, actually it is. I'm going to back that out a half turn because I want to show you guys something. There we go. So I'm just going to back that out at one turn. And then these two springs, or these two screws in the back, they're interchangeable. Again, we're not going super tight here. Something to watch out for. I've seen some guns where these were actually, for whatever reason, ended up retaining the plunger. Not on this gun, but on other single action style models. So something to be careful when you're disassembling like your Colt clones, is to make sure that spring doesn't come out of there. Alright, so we got those are a little loose still. Now the next step is our trigger return spring and the pin for it. Alright, now I've already greased and lubricated this thing. Now this part is one of those things you have to kind of feel your way in. You put it into the back with the hooks facing down, and you want to kind of angle it because you want it to get behind the trigger. This little notch on the back of the trigger it needs to sit on. I'm just looking until I can see it's lined up. Take our little cheater pin here. There we go. And a little wiggle and a jiggle, and it'll go in. There we go. Just need a little love tap. So just again, we check as we go. I'm going to put that hammer spring up, and I just want to make sure that my trigger is resetting. Okay, and you should see those arms flexing if they're not hooked in, but this is just a good check to do while you're going. So I didn't take this guy down. You can if you want to. You can see the spring's been massaged a little bit. I've done a little polishing on it. The trick to remember with these is that the hump goes in the same direction as the back strap. So what we're going to do is, again, see if I can get you guys a good angle here. Kind of feel it in there. A lot harder with the classic back straps, or not the back straps. The smaller stirrups make this a lot more interesting, and I actually have a couple specialized tools for that. Okay, and I actually made a couple specialized tools for taking these springs on and off. So one thing you want to check. This is, again, we're doing our checks here. Look at the back of the hammer. There you can see how the strut is sitting in that pocket there. That's where you want it to be. Now, if you're trying to get your strut in, again, if you got the older, maybe you got the older style stirrup, and you're struggling to get your strut in, what you can do is just kind of wiggle the hammer back and forth, and that'll eventually walk it in. These guys only go in one way, and it's from the right. So what I'm going to do here, you see how I backed it off just a little. I'm going to get just enough that I can get that on. Okay, and then again, kind of just start doing a little wiggle and a jiggle. There you go. See, and you want to try and get it about as far in there as you can. There we go. Sorry, oh, I did that off camera, didn't I? So, again, that's one of those things where you just need a little bit of force. But we're going to cock it again real quick. All right. Ease off. See how it's loose? So if you can get it in there like that, that's perfect. That can be a little hard. So cock it again. Pull out our tension pin. There we go. This is actually an old broken piece of trigger spring. You can use literally anything. But you just want something that passes through that little hole right there. And that just helps a lot with takedown and reassembly. Do is we're going to reinstall our retention cross pin, our base cylinder latch pin for the technical term. Goes in on the right. Put your spring on. There we go. Now again, for reassembly, you know, not a lot of wrong ways to do that as long as you have the parts in order. Bust out my pliers here again. So we're looking to see that it cocks, looking to see that it fires. We want to see that the pawl lifts. You want to make sure your bolt catch drops. Now at this point we can tighten everything back up. Don't forget this step, this is fairly important. But the reason I leave everything loose is because when you're installing your mainspring, it can get a lot easier to get it to fit if there's just a little bit of slop. And I'm talking a couple thous. There we go. These guys tightened up. going to start that. And grab our cylinder. And again, it's one of those things you just kind of let it drop in, don't force it. There we go. See, so it's just keeping gentle pressure, and it goes in. And sometimes it takes a little finagling there. There we go. So we'll make sure it cocks, make sure it fires, and make sure the cylinder rotates. And we want to make sure that bolt catch is grabbing the cylinder. That is how you completely detail strip and reassemble a Ruger Vaquero 357 Magnum. I'll do more videos like this. I hope you guys enjoyed.